I never meant for it to happen. If you had asked me then, I would have told you that Jonah Reese was nothing more than a responsibility, someone I cared for out of loyalty, not love. But sometimes the heart betrays the mind in ways that can't be undone, and I suppose that's what this story is really about, that we met on an ordinary Tuesday, though nothing about that day feels ordinary anymore. I was 24, still figuring out what kind of man I wanted to be, and he was the one who unknowingly pulled me into a storm. Jonah had been in an accident, nothing fatal, but serious enough to leave him needing help with the basics of life. I was asked to check in on him, to bring groceries, to make sure he was managing. It sounded simple at the time. I didn't realize that stepping into his small apartment would alter the entire rhythm of my days. The first time I saw him, he was propped on the couch, a cast running from his knee to his ankle, his face pale, but still lit with a crooked grin. "You must be Caleb," he said, voice soft, as though he wasn't used to speaking much. I nodded, awkward, unsure how to carry myself around someone who looked at me with such openness. His eyes had a way of drawing you in, as if you were the only one who could keep him from unraveling. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of my own barriers. I started going over daily, carrying bags of fruit, cartons of milk, things he couldn't fetch on his own. At first, it was small tasks, helping him adjust his pillows, making sure he took his meds, setting water by his bed. But soon it grew into more. I learned the way he liked his coffee, 2 spoons of sugar stirred counterclockwise, the way he hummed to himself when the silence felt too loud, the way he winced when he tried to stand on his own. There was something about caring for Jonah that disarmed me. I wasn't used to being needed. Most of my life, I had lived quietly, moving through days with little notice. But with him, I became necessary. He depended on me, and I realized, to my surprise, I liked the weight of that responsibility. It made me feel tethered to something real. One evening, rain streaked the windows, and the apartment smelled faintly of soap. Jonah shifted uncomfortably in his chair and said, almost too casually, "I can't do this alone, Caleb. Even showering feels impossible." He let the words hang in the air, uncertain. I froze, unsure of what he was asking. His eyes flicked to mine, and in them I saw not shame but trust, pure, unguarded trust. Helping him bathe was not something I prepared for. It was intimate in a way that defied description. The bathroom was small, the air heavy with steam. I tried to keep my movements clinical, efficient, but nothing about the moment felt clinical. My hands trembled slightly as I steadied him, guiding him carefully, the warmth of the water running down his skin. He laughed once, awkwardly, saying, "Guess this is a first for both of us." I smiled, though my chest ached in ways I didn't understand. There was no lust in that moment. Not then, but something deeper, something that lodged itself inside me like a secret. I realized that trust is heavier than desire. It binds you, pulls at you, reshapes you. As I helped him, as his shoulder brushed mine, I felt something shift. What had been care began to feel like something else, something more dangerous. I told myself it was only gratitude I saw in his eyes when he whispered a quiet thank you, but my heart rebelled against logic. I lay awake that night, turning it over in my mind, replaying the sound of his voice, the curve of his smile, the weight of his reliance on me. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, I knew that. But feelings rarely ask permission before they arrive. From that day forward, the air between us was different, though Jonah didn't seem to notice. He joked, he teased, he asked me to pass him the remote or refill his glass, and I obliged with steady hands and an unsteady heart. Every small gesture, every laugh we shared, stitched me tighter into the quiet net of affection I hadn't meant to weave. The central conflict had already taken root, though I couldn't see it fully then. It wasn't about whether I loved him. That part one could not control. The conflict was whether I could keep it hidden, whether I could continue being the caretaker, the friend, without betraying the truth inside me. And as I watched him sit across from me, hair damp from the shower I'd helped him take, his smile easy, his guard down, I feared I was already losing that battle. There are moments in life you can't walk back from. That evening in a bathroom was one of them. It was the moment I crossed an invisible threshold. The moment care became something far riskier. And though Jonah didn't know it, though he may never have guessed, I walked out of that room carrying more than his trust. I carried the beginning of a love that would one day break me. It's strange how quickly something ordinary can begin to feel extraordinary when your heart is involved. Days with Jonah became patterns I looked forward to, though I never admitted it out loud. I would arrive with groceries tucked under my arm, pretending it was just duty, but the truth was that my pulse quickened every time I knocked on his door. His voice, calling me in, was enough to undo the calm exterior I tried so hard to maintain. Jonah was healing, slowly. His limp remained, his movements cautious, but he had started reclaiming pieces of independence. I should have been glad to see him getting stronger, and but a part of me feared what his strength meant for us. If he didn't need me, where would that leave me? Care had been my excuse to stay close, but the more I lingered, the more my feelings outgrew the boundaries of friendship. It was in the quiet moments that I felt it most. We'd sit side by side, a movie flickering in the background, and I'd find myself watching him instead of the screen. His laughter, unguarded and sudden, would make me want to freeze time. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was embarrassed, the way his hair curled slightly when damp. It all settled in my memory like details I had no right to treasure. Point one night, the power went out during a storm. Candles lit the room in a soft, golden haze, and Jonah leaned back, shaking his head. "Guess it's just us in the dark," he said, smiling faintly. I could feel the words hang heavier than he intended. Just us. Alone in the quiet, with the rain drumming against the glass, I felt the edges of my restraint begin to fray. He spoke more that night than usual, sharing stories of old relationships, the kind that had left him fractured. He didn't give me names, just fragments, betrayals, disappointments, a constant fear of being left behind. As he spoke, I felt a mix of emotions: pity, anger at the faceless people who had hurt him, and a selfish flicker of hope that maybe I could be the one to do better. But every time that thought crept in, I shoved it back down. I was his caretaker, his friend. Nothing more. Still, my silence didn't stop my heart from betraying me. I caught myself leaning closer when he talked, memorizing the subtle shifts in his voice, the way his eyes softened when he trusted me with something vulnerable. Desire grew not out of lust, but out of intimacy, the kind that can only be built in stolen hours, through touch that lingers a second too long, through glances that never quite break when issued out. I think he sensed something, though he never said it outright. Sometimes his gaze held mine longer than necessary. Sometimes he'd let his arm brush mine, almost carelessly, but not quite. The ambiguity gnawed at me. Was I imagining it? Was he simply comfortable? Or was there something underneath, unspoken, just like with me? There was a night when the tension almost broke. We were sitting on a couch, the glow of the TV painting shadows across his face. He turned to me suddenly, eyes searching mine, and asked, "Why do you keep doing all this for me, Caleb?" His tone wasn't suspicious, just curious, but it shook me. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything. That wasn't obligation keeping me here, that every gesture came from a place of love I couldn't control. My mouth opened, but the words stuck. Instead, I shrugged and said lightly, "Because you'd be helpless without me." He laughed, but something in his eyes told me he knew I was hiding more. That became the rhythm of us, him unknowingly pulling me closer, me wrestling with feelings I couldn't confess. Every act of care deepened the bond and deepened my secret, helping him stand, steadying his hand when he faltered, hearing him whisper a tired thank you. It all felt like pieces of a language only we spoke. And yet, it was a language without a name, without permission to cross into love. The conflict grew heavier inside me. I wanted to keep caring for him, to keep being the one he relied on, but every day my heart pressed harder against the walls I had built around it. Love wasn't safe here. Love could ruin everything. Still, I couldn't stop myself from hoping. Point one late afternoon, sunlight spilled through the blinds, and Jonah dozed lightly on the couch. I sat across the room, book in hand, though I wasn't reading. I was watching him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, memorizing the peace on his face. My chest ached with the weight of it. I realized then, fully and without denial, that I loved him, not in the casual, fleeting way I had loved before, but in a way that terrified me, a way that felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff without knowing what lay below that I should have told him. I should have spoken then, when the moment was soft and still. But I didn't. Instead, I carried it inside, a secret that burned brighter with each passing day. When he woke and caught me staring, he smiled sleepily and said, "What?" I shook my head, pretending I hadn't been lost in him, pretending everything was as it had always been. He accepted it, stretching before turning on the TV, but I knew the truth. Something had shifted in me that could not shift back. And so the days went on, my heart tangled in silence, my care growing into something neither of us dared to name. The more I loved him, the more I feared losing him, and the more I feared that telling him the truth would end everything. What I didn't realize then was that secrets have their own way of unraveling. Love, when hidden, does not stay hidden forever. The shift between us wasn't sudden, though when I look back, it feels like it happened all at once. One moment we were just two outcasts learning to lean on each other, and the next we were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something we could neither name nor escape. A tea happened on a night when the house felt emptier than usual. Richard had taken my mother and the rest of the family on a weekend trip to the city. Noah and I had been left behind, an afterthought in their carefully curated picture of perfection. To them, we were easier to ignore than to include. At first, the loneliness stung, but as the hours stretched into evening, the silence between us carried a strange kind of freedom. The rain began just after dark. It pounded against the windows, steady and relentless, drowning out the quiet hum of the house. We sat together in the living room, the only light coming from a single lamp in the corner. Noah was sketching again, his pencil moving with deliberate precision, while I watched the storm. "Feels like the whole world's shutting us in," I murmured. He looked up, his eyes catching mine. Then he signed, "Maybe that's not so bad." I don't know why those words struck me so hard. Maybe it was the way his face softened when he signed them, or the faint curve of his mouth, as though he knew more than he was saying. Whatever it was, something shifted in me, and I couldn't look away. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The storm grew louder, the house trembling under the weight of the thunder. When the lights flickered once, then twice, before finally giving out, we were left in near darkness. Noah set his pencil down. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of rain and the thundering of my own heartbeat. I lit a candle from the drawer, its flame small and unsteady, but enough to cast a soft glow over his face. He looked ethereal in the flickering light, shadows carving depth into his expression. I signed slowly, my hands clumsy in the low light. "Are you scared?" He shook his head. "Not with you." The words landed deep, heavy with meaning I couldn't ignore. My throat tightened. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was look at him, at the way his hands rested so close to mine on the couch. The space between us felt fragile, charged, like the air before lightning strikes. I could feel his warmth even without touching him. And then, without fully deciding to, I moved closer, but he didn't pull away. His gaze held steady, unflinching, as though he'd been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. My hand brushed against his, tentative, a question more than a gesture. For a second, time froze. Then he answered, his fingers curling against mine, firm and certain. The storm outside raged on, but inside, everything went quiet. My thoughts, my doubts, the years of silence and rejection, all of it faded into the background. All I could feel was him, his hand anchoring me in a way nothing else ever had. We sat like that for what felt like forever, caught in the gravity of something too powerful to deny. Every second deep in the truth we had both tried to bury. This was no longer just survival. This was something else, something forbidden, something real. When I finally found the courage to look at him, I saw the same conflict mirrored in his eyes, fear and longing tangled together, daring us both to choose. "Noah," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear it. Still, his eyes softened, as if he had caught the meaning anyway that I leaned in before I could stop myself, drawn by a force I didn't understand but couldn't resist. And when our foreheads touched, just barely, it felt like the world had tipped off its axis that we didn't kiss. Not then, but the closeness, the intimacy of that simple touch was more powerful than any kiss could have been. It was a promise, unspoken and undeniable, that the line between us had already been crossed. When I pulled back, I half expected him to look away, to retreat into the safety of silence. But instead, he signed, his hands trembling slightly. We can't tell them that I nodded, the weight of his words pressing hard against my chest. I know, and just like that, we had entered a secret pact, one built on both fear and desire. We knew what the family would say, how they would twist our bond into something ugly. We knew we were already walking the line of betrayal, daring to claim something they would never allow. That night, after the storm faded and the house fell quiet again, I lay awake in bed replaying every moment. The way his hand had felt in mine, the way his eyes had softened when our foreheads touched, the way he hadn't pulled away that I should have been terrified of what it meant, but instead, I felt alive, more alive than I ever had before. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving in the shadows of a family that didn't want me. I was stepping into something brighter, riskier, and infinitely more real. Still, beneath the exhilaration was a thread of fear, because I knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Secrets like ours had a way of coming to light, no matter how tightly you try to hold them in the dark. And when it did, everything we had left, the fragile bond that had saved us both, would be tested in ways I wasn't sure we could survive. It happened quietly, almost cruelly so, without the drama I always imagined betrayal would carry. No slammed doors, no shouted accusations, just a discovery that left me hollow. I had gone to Jonah's apartment earlier than usual, carrying his favorite takeout, the kind of small gesture I hoped might coax the smile I loved back onto his face. The door was unlocked, and I let myself in, calling his name as I stepped inside, that he wasn't in the living room. The TV was off, the curtains drawn, the silence unnerving. I moved toward the bedroom, my heart thudding with an unease I couldn't explain. The door was cracked, and through that narrow space I saw him, sitting on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but tender. I couldn't hear every word, but the ones I caught were enough. "I miss you too. Oh, don't worry. He doesn't know." He didn't see me. I backed away before he could, my chest burning as though I'd swallowed fire. The takeout bag slipped from my hand, spilling across the floor, but I barely noticed. I left the apartment without a sound, the weight of those few words echoing louder than any confrontation could. For hours, I walked the city streets aimlessly, rain soaking through my jacket. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and those whispers cut the deepest. I replayed every moment between us, every kiss, every brush of his hand, and wondered if I had been blind, if I had mistaken pity for affection, need for love. When I finally returned, he was waiting, his expression stricken as if he already knew what I had overheard. "Caleb," he said, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Who was it?" My voice was steady, though I felt anything but that he hesitated, his silence more telling than any confession. When he finally spoke, his words felt like knives. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "I gave you everything. My time, my heart, my care. I thought you wanted me to." "I did," he said quickly, desperation flashing in his eyes. "Ido. But I never promised." "No." I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You never promised. You let me believe, let me hope, and all the while you were holding on to someone else." He lowered his gaze, shame painting his features. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but intention didn't erase reality. The trust we had built, fragile and precious, had cracked beyond repair. The memory of that first night in the bathroom, the tenderness, the vulnerability, now felt tainted, transformed into something I could hardly bear to hold. What I once saw as love now felt like a cruel trick played by my own heart. I left that night, though leaving felt like tearing a piece of myself away. He called after me, his voice breaking, but I didn't turn back. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking away from someone you don't love. It's walking away from someone you love too much, knowing they can't give you what you deserve. In the days that followed, silence became my only companion. I kept expecting him to reach out, to explain, to fight for what we had, but his absence was as clear as his betrayal. And maybe that was the final truth. I had been a chapter in his story, but he had been the whole book in mine. That I thought about the moments that had brought us here, the warmth of his shoulder against mine, the way he had whispered thank you in the quiet, the fleeting kiss that felt like forever. Those memories still cut, but they also reminded me that I had loved fully, without reserve. Maybe that was the only solace I had, that I had been true, even if he hadn't. Point one evening, weeks later, I found myself standing outside his building, staring up at the familiar windows. The light was on, shadows moving behind the curtains, and I wondered if he was with the person from the phone call, if he laughed with them the way he once laughed with me. For a moment, I almost went inside, but then I realized that some doors, once closed, must stay closed. As so, I walked away. Not quickly, not with anger, but with the slow, deliberate steps of someone finally learning to let go. The pain didn't vanish. It pulsed with every heartbeat. But beneath it, there was something else, something quieter. A sense of survival, of resilience. Love had betrayed me, yes, but it had also changed me. I was no longer the man who walked into Jonah's apartment that first day, carrying groceries and expecting nothing more than routine. I had loved, I had lost, and I had learned that even in betrayal, there's growth. That I don't know if Jonah ever thinks of me, if he ever wonders what we might have been had he chosen differently. Perhaps he does, perhaps he doesn't. But I think of him, not with the same longing as before, but with a bittersweet tenderness. He was both my undoing and my awakening. And though it hurts to admit, I don't regret it. Because in loving him, even briefly, I discovered parts of myself I might never have known. The depth of my devotion, the fragility of trust, the strength it takes to walk away. That is where our story ends. Not with a grand reconciliation, not with vengeance, but with me standing in the quiet aftermath, holding the lessons of love and betrayal in equal measure. And though the wound still aches, I know one day it will scar, and I will carry it not as a mark of weakness, but as proof that I lived, that I felt, that I loved.